Now we are doing lab 2, implementing failover clustering. Our objective is to set up a CSV storage, configure a file server for failover cluster, validate the high availability, and configure cluster aware updating. So our exercise one is to configure a failover cluster. Now this is what I did with my money students. I disabled the ability to, what we did was to first of all set up the failover clustering features and create a cluster. Thereafter, we can now create the Iscsi storage. Are we together? So we're not going to do the Iscsi storage before. We're going to do it aftermath when failover cluster has been set up. Listen attentively to exactly what I'm doing. So I've confirmed on my Active Directory here that my 2 server systems are domain members. They are not Active Directory. I only have one Active Directory domain controller, which is my what? Server what? 1. Okay. And that's my DHCP list to server 3. Of course, you can statically assign the IP address for best practice, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it the way it is dynamically connected. Even though it tries to renew, it will be giving the same IP address. Now, what I'm going to do, this is my server 2. This is my server 2. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to log in, Control Delete. So I'm going to log in, I'm going to pause now, then log both of them in. Now we're going to start with task 2 because task 1 said we needed to connect the 2 computer system to a 3-disk Iscsi drive. Okay, but we're not going to do that now. I'm going to do that aftermath. Are we together? Now let's first of all install the failover cluster features in both server 1 and on what? Sorry, in server 2 and in server what? 3 in my case. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the dashboard, then I'm going to click on add rows and features.
Is that the main server?
No, not the main server. On server 2 and server 3 in my case. But in your case, it should be probably server 3 and 4. Are we together? Yeah. So click next. Because we're installing it on servers that do not run Active Directory. The 2 other servers. We have no business with server 1 for now. We'll get to server 1 later on. Don't worry. So click next. And it's a feature. So we go to the features. So we look for failover clustering. That's it there. We click add rows, next, and install. So while this is going on, we'll just switch over to server 2 and do server 3 and do exactly the same thing. Now I've installed the failover cluster row in server 3. You can all see that, right? So let's allow the installation to go through. When the installation is done, the next task we're going to be doing is going to task 3. Take note, we still have pending tasks in task 1. Are we together? So we go to task 3, we're going to validate the server for failover clustering. We're going to test them to see if they are eligible to host failover clustering. Then we're going to get some warnings and some errors, but undermining those facts, we'll still be able to set up failover clustering. Okay, so I'm going to just wait for the installation to go through. When it's done, we'll proceed. Okay, now server 3 shows that the row has been installed, and if I go to server 2, I also confirm that the row has been what? Installed. The next task we need to do is to run the validation what? Wizard. Is that correct? It said, but we should do that on server 2, right? Because you know our lab is showing us 3 and 4. So 3 is automatically 2, while 4 is automatically 3. So I'm going to go to server 2, which is this. I'm going to close. I'm going to go to Tools. I'm going to start up the Failover Cluster Manager. So I'm just going to wait for it to open up. Then I'll proceed. It shows that the Failover Cluster Manager has no cluster. Is that not correct? So we need to set up what? A cluster, right? So what we need to do now, I'll need to go to the validation configuration. I'll click validate configuration. So the wizard is going to pop up. Then I'm going to add both server 1, server 2, and server 3 at the same time. So in this case, I know the name of my servers. So it's SRV2. I'll click add. and that's it. It's going to add it immediately. And SRV3, I'm going to click add, and that is it. Server 3 is added. Now, those are the two servers I'm going to be running my test on. So I'm going to click on next. Of course, it's going to run all tests recommended. And I'll click next, and that is it. It will validate and give me a report. So it's fine. Some of the times it's going to skip some storage because we don't have any storage, Iscsi storage system set up yet. So I'm just going to wait for the wizard to go through. When it's done, we'll be able to see the reports. Okay, now it's fine. Okay, guys, the validation wizard has been run. You can see there it says validated, but there are kind of some errors. If you notice, most of the errors there are just warnings. Can you see that? Then, of course, it says testing has completed successfully. The configuration appears to be suitable for what? Clustering. Is that not what it says there? Actually, you can come and click and view reports here, which will open on Internet Explorer. And you can come and check network. It says there are some warnings on network. It says validate IP address. There are warnings there. So we can scroll down to see what are the warnings there on the network. It says server 2 does not have an adapter usable for cluster with a defined gateway. So actually it's looking for a gateway, but in this case, we're not using a default gateway. Is that not correct? So that's the only warning we can see there. On other network configuration, it says node server 3 is reachable from node server 2. So they are both reachable. And of course, we can see all that. So guys, they are just setting configuration there that also shows the network validity. And of course, Iscsi no disk is found. We all know that. We're going to set up that later on. Okay, guys, I can close this or I can save it just to keep it for documentation's sake. Then you notice there's a checkbox here. There's a box here that says check create cluster now with validated what? Nodes. Can you see that? Now, according to our lab, we're asked to what? We're asked to create what? Class? We're asked to create what? We have to create a new failover cluster with what node? To use server 3 and server what? Server 4. So in our case, we're using server 2 and 3. So I'm going to allow this box to be checked and I'm going to click on finish. Then the wizard will pop up immediately. Can you see that? The wizard for creating the cluster. So I'm going to click on next. And what cluster name are we supposed to give it? Our cluster name is cluster 1, right? So we'll call it cluster 1. And I'm going to click on next. Now, that's the cluster we're creating there. And if you notice there, that is cluster 1, and that is the 2 nodes we're using. And that is the IP address on the DHCP that is currently connected to them. Can you see that? It says add or enable, add all eligible storage to what? To the cluster. Are we together? If you go previously, that's the name. So yeah, it says all networks were configured automatically. So it's going to get the IP address automatically. So I'm going to click next. It says add all eligible what? Cluster. Actually, if one of our network adapter was using a static IP address, it will actually give us an option where we have to put a static IP address. Is it giving you that option? Okay, so I'm going to click next. Next, and that's it. It's going to validate the configuration, and our wizard, sorry, our cluster will be created. So we'll just wait for the cluster to go through, and that's it. Then we'll be created. Quorum mode, it's using node what? Majority. Is that not correct? and it's going to get IP address from this DHCP. Now, to confirm whether it actually got IP address from here, can we go to the main server system? I'm logging to my main server now. I'm going to look at my DHCP pool. I'm going to go to my DHCP pool. I'm going to refresh. And it shows that it has given somebody an IP address. 192.168.1.what? 4. Can you see that? Huh? Can you see that? So, .4 is what is the IP address assigned to that cluster, because the cluster is a computer. Are we following? Are we following? The cluster is a computer. If I was to go to Active Directory here, let me refresh this. If I go to computers, you can see there's a computer name called Cluster 1. Yes or no? Yes or no, class? Now, Cluster 1 shows that this is a physical computer, but if you notice on the description there, which is very nice, it says Failover Cluster Virtual Network Name Account. So this is actually a computer system that we can actually use within the entire infrastructure of Active Directory. Okay, let's move back to server 2. That's server 2 now. Okay, our core mode, it's node majority, so I'm going to click on finish. And that's it. I'm clicking on finishing now, and that is our cluster there. So if you expand this, of course, it's going to pop up now. So guys, that is the cluster. That's the resources. Of course, you can add more nodes. So if I expand this now, if I go to nodes, it will show me server 1 and server what? Server 2 and server what? Server 2 and server what? 3. And if you expand storage, we don't currently have any disk, which we're going to do later on. We don't have any pool of storage that we're creating. And we don't have any network for, of course, our cluster network is there. This is a cluster that we'll be using for our configuration. If you click on network connection, that's a 2 network connection from server 1, server 2, and server 3. These are the network adapter we're using for the cluster. Are we following? Okay, the next task we're going to be doing now, we're going to go back now to server task 1. We're going to create an Iscsi storage. Then from that Iscsi storage, we're going to be adding the Iscsi storage to these 2 servers. So this is your task. Log into server 3. Sorry, your main server system. Log into the main server system. Go to Iscsi target server. Create 2 Iscsi disk. Create 2 Iscsi disks, 2 gig each. Call them disk name cluster 1 and cluster 2. Then the target name should be Iscsi 01. That should be the Iscsi target name. Then, of course, on the IQN name, add the IP address of server 1, server 2, and server 3. In your case, some of you will be server 3 and 4. Add those IP addresses on the IQN on the main server. We'll proceed from there. So I'm going to be doing mine as well, and I'll show you what I'm doing. Now, we have all installed the network load balancing on both server systems, right? You've run the validation wizard. Is that not correct? And you guys created the cluster. But remember, during the creating the cluster, we used dynamic IP address. Is that not correct? Is that not correct? Yes. We used a dynamic IP address. That's why if you come to the network name here, you'll notice that it will show you what IP address you're using there. Can you see that? Class? Can you see that? It shows you what? The IP address that you're using within the system. If you right click on the property, you notice that the address is listed by DHCP server from this network. There are no policies yet. Okay. Now, the next task is to configure shared storage. Now, if you come to disk, you notice that we don't have a disk here, right? Because we've not added what? An Iscsi disk. Is that not correct? So now I'm going to go to my main server system. Let me log in. I'm going to go to my main server system. I'm going to go to the server manager, file and storage services. I'm going to click on what? Iscsi. Of course, you notice it will ask you here to install the Iscsi server. Is that not correct? Because we want to host Iscsi drives. So I'm going to click install Iscsi server. So I'm going to click next, next, and go through the installation. So I'm selecting the Iscsi target server and the Iscsi storage provider. So I'm going to click next. I'm going to click next and finish. So, okay. One class. Now mine is done. So I'm going to click on close. So now it's asking me to add an Iscsi what? Virtual disk. So I'm going to click on that. Remember, we're using our main server system to host the disk. Are we together? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to come here and says select the volume where you want to store it. I'm going to store it here on the drive C, which is fine. So what did I say we should call it? Cluster what? Cluster disk 1. Okay, so I'm going to click next. I'm going to put 2 gig. I'm going to click next. I'm going to create a new Iscsi target. And what's the target name? Iscsi. Iscsi. Or what? 1. So I'm going to click next. Then we're going to add the access server system. And I say you should use all 3 IP address, right? So 192.168.1.1. That's my host. And I'm going to add the IP address again. 192.168.1.2. Then my last IP address is .5, which is 192.168.1.5. Okay, guys, that's all. So I'm going to click next. I'm not using any authentication method, so I'm going to click next and create. So I'll do the same for cluster disk 2. Okay. Okay, that's it. Okay, guys, you can see it's done, right? So I'm going to click on close, and that is the initializing taking place. That's the Iscsi target, and I just wait for this to finish initializing the disk. Then I can add the second disk as well. So hopefully you can see that the hard drive has been added, right? And if you scroll down, you can see the Iscsi target. Is that not correct? So now let's switch over to our server system that we'll be using for the Iscsi configuration. So this is my server 2. I'm going to go to the server manager. Then I'm going to come to the tools. I'm going to go to Iscsi Initiator. Of course, I'm going to start the service. And we'll wait for the service to pop up. Please, guys, pay attention to what I'm doing now. It's very serious. Then I'm going to go to discovery. Then I'm going to type the IP address 192.168.1.1. I'm going to click OK. And when I come to targets, you notice it discovers the target immediately, right? So I'm going to click what? Connect. I'm going to enable multipath. And I'm going to click what? OK. Is it connected? Exactly. So I'm going to close this. Now I'm going to do the same for, okay, before I go further, I'm going to go to tools. I'm going to go to computer management. Just to confirm that the disk it's there, I'm going to go to the disk management. Then you notice that the disk is there, right? So I'm going to initialize the disk 1, because we have 2 of them, right? I'm going to put them online, and I'm going to initialize both. I'm going to select both. Of course, the system does that automatically. Then I'm going to partition. So create a simple volume. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm creating a simple volume for both of them. I also come here as well. Create a simple volume. Oh, sorry, I have a duplicated name. Sorry about that. So I just call this disk 2. Okay, guys. So those are the volumes. We've partitioned them. We formatted them. They do exist. So now I'm going to move to server 3. That's my server 3 there. Then I'm going to log in as well using my password. Okay, the rows is the Failover Cluster has been installed long time. I'm going to go to Iscsi Initiator, run the service. But take note, when you added the cluster to server 2, in server 3 also is also added as well. Is that not correct? Yes. If you compare them. So now I'm going to come to Discovery Portal. I'm going to type the IP address 192.168.1.1. I'm going to click OK. I'll come to Target, immediately discovers it. Is that not correct? So I'm going to click Connect, enable multipath. I'll click OK and I'll click OK. Now let's go to the tools now. Computer management. Just to confirm that the disk do exist. So I'll just wait for computer management to open up. You can see that they are both partitioned. Is that not correct? But they're actually offline. Is that not correct? So what we're going to do now, we're going to put them online. We're going to put this online. And automatically they're going to be given a disk name here as well. Can you see that, class? Okay, now let's go to server. Let's go to server. If you go to task 1, it says we should connect to the discovery target. We've done that. Repeat the step for the server system. Bring all the disk online. Partition it. Open disk management. Refresh and bring all the disk online. Have we done that now? So we've done task 1. Now in task 2, it says we should go to server 3, which I'm currently at. Open the Failover Cluster in server 3 now. And it says we should locate the disk. We should locate the disk. Locate the disk that is assigned to the available storage. If possible, use cluster disk 2 and add this disk to cluster shared volume. Okay, so this is what we're going to do now. I'm going to expand the cluster. I'm going to expand storage. I'm going to click on disk. Now you notice that when I clicked on disk, I only have what? No disk. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, I'm going to click on add disk. Did you notice how many disks do I have there? 2. Is that not correct? So I'm going to add both of them. I'm going to click OK. And that's it. Both disks will be added. The wizard is going to go up, put them online, and everything will be ready to go. Are we together, guys? So if you go to the cluster 1, if you go to cluster 1, .pc.local, of course you see your cluster there. It says cluster 1 has no cluster rows but has 2 nodes. Are we together? Okay, guys, that's but before we finish, we're asked to add one of the disks to a shared, to what? To a cluster shared what? Volume. If you notice here, it's available storage, right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to click on cluster 2. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say what? Add to what? Cluster shared volume. That's it, guys. So it's going to add the disk to cluster shared volume. So you notice now, you see a difference between both of them. If you look at disk 1, disk 1 says drive E, meaning it's a physical hard drive. If you look at this cluster shared volume, it's no longer drive E, drive C or drive D. It's now stored in drive C. It's a kind of a file that is stored in a what? In a folder. Did you see that? So take note of that. So I'm going to stop this now. So that's our exercise 1. So I'm going to move to exercise 2 now. Okay? So I'm going to stop that. So that's all for the first part.